Hello, cruel world. My name is Dr. Shaham Das. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders for a living so that you don't have to. You can call me the ominous Shahamanist. Now, this video is 5 myths about kidnapping. Within this video, I'm going to talk to you about reasons why people might kidnap their own relatives. We're going to talk about Amber Alerts, so what are they, when are they used? I'm going to tell you about a couple of famous cases, including PATTY HEARST. And that is renowned as one of the most bizarre and strongest cases of Stockholm Syndrome. So I'm also going to explain to you what Stockholm Syndrome is, what the psychology behind it is, etc., etc. And of course, there's going to be some awkward dad jokes along the way. Enough foreplay, let's get into it. Cue the music. Okay, myth number 1 about kidnapping is that kidnapping always involves a ransom demand. In reality, there's lots of different motivations. So the common ones, as well as money, might be revenge. There's parental abduction, by which I mean parents abducting young children because they've separated with a mother or father and they have a lack of access. Obviously, I don't mean abducting your own parents. That would be ridiculous, especially your parents, because we both know that you don't need any more passive-aggressive home-cooked lunches with overboiled Brussels sprouts and lumpy gravy. And another motivation, not very funny, but a bit serious, a bit dark, is human trafficking. So I've actually got a documentary that I did for All 4 about a horrific case of human trafficking, a real-life survivor called Chandra who outsmarted her trafficker. And I dissect the psychology behind this. Always be plugging. Moving on, myth number 2, kidnapping always involves strangers. So most kidnappings actually involve somebody that victims know, like a family member or a friend, not a very good friend, or an acquaintance. I'll give you an example. So you might have heard of the case of ELISABETH SMART. So in June 2002, 14-year-old ELISABETH SMART was abducted from her Salt Lake City home by her own father, Brian David Mitchell, and his wife, Wanda Barzy. Mitchell was a religious fanatic who held Elizabeth Smart captive for 9 months because he believed that he needed to take Elizabeth as his second wife based on his distorted interpretation of Mormonism. That's pretty yucky even to say all of that, isn't it? It's wrong on so many levels and it's going to make Christmas lunch very awkward. Just to be clear, that's Brian David Mitchell, not David Mitchell, the man from Peep Show and Would I Lie to You, who I'm sure is a lovely bloke and probably hasn't kidnapped his own children and forced them into marriage. So Elizabeth was held captive for 9 months. She was subjected to physical and abuse. She was forced to wear white robes. She was moved to various locations, including campsites, suburban neighborhood in San Diego. She was finally recognized and rescued by police on March the 12th, 2003 on a street in Utah, thanks to public tips and her own bravery speaking up. Mitchell and Barzy were arrested and eventually convicted. We can only hope that Mitchell will find his own wife in prison, ideally not on a voluntary basis. Okay, that moves me on to my next slightly bizarre topic, which is 5 reasons why people kidnap their relatives. I'm not going to put Elizabeth Smart's reason, the father's reason, as in trying to make a wife for your daughter on the list, because obviously that's so rare, even for Utah. Reason number 1 that you might want to abduct a relative is custody disputes. So in child abduction case, a family member, usually a parent estranged from the custodial parent, might kidnap their child. This can be fueled by not really money, but by feelings of anger, desperation, or some sort of warped desire to maintain a relationship with the child. Reason number 2 that you might kidnap your own relatives is financial gain. So it might be easier for you to kidnap for ransom if you know the financial situation. So if you know that your uncle pretends to be poor but he's a multimillionaire, then you can exploit that weakness. Reason number 3 why you might kidnap a family member is control or manipulation. So a family member might kidnap their own relative to make them do something they don't want to do. This could be tied into domestic violence, an abusive relationship, or even mental health issues for the perpetrator. Reason number 4 that you might want to kidnap your own relative is there's some sort of belief that you're protecting them in some way. So you might have some misguided kind of thoughts that you're protecting them from harm. This could be related, is very commonly related to mental illness or paranoia. Paranoia, I got something for you. It's made of chrome and it will burst your dome. Reason number 5 why you might kidnap a family member is simply familiarity, ease. So if you know the victim's whereabouts, their routines, their weaknesses, the kind of chinks in their security and their residence, if you've got keys, etc., then it gives you the edge, the advantage in a kidnapping situation. Okay, myth number 3 about kidnappers is that they always take their victims far away. In reality, many kidnaps are often short-term and they happen locally within the local area, because the goal might be to get ransom money quickly, so you don't need to necessarily hide them in a stash house far away. Especially true if they're taken by somebody who's known to the victim, who's trying to just hide in plain sight. So that individual tries to follow their usual daily routine. The chances are they live near to the victim, so they have to act as if everything's normal. So another example of a case like this, and it's very, very widely known in the UK, in England at the time, was in February the 19th, 2008, Shannon Matthews, who was a 9-year-old child, went missing from a house in Dewsbury in West Yorkshire in England. There was this massive police search by the police in the community. There was a national concern. After 24 days, it was revealed that Shannon's mother, Karen Matthews, and her partner's uncle, Michael Donovan, had basically orchestrated the entire disappearance. The motive behind that fake kidnapping is a bit unclear. It might have been for ransom. It might have even been just to gain notoriety and attention, which is pretty twisted, let's face it. So eventually Shannon Matthews was found alive at a house in Batley Car, West Yorkshire, England. The house belonged to 39-year-old Michael Donovan, the uncle of Shannon's stepfather. Batley Car and Dewsbury are only about 2 kilometres apart, so she ended up being held for 24 days very close to where she disappeared. Myth number 4 about kidnappings is about Amber Alerts. Amber Alerts are often used. So, contrary to popular belief, Amber Alerts are used for a tiny fraction of missing child reports. So what is an Amber Alert? Glad you asked. It's an emergency alert system designed to help find adopted children quickly. So law enforcement agencies believe the child's in imminent danger, and that's the thing I'm trying to highlight here. It's not just for somebody who's gone missing and might be safe, it's if they're in imminent danger of serious harm or death. And there obviously has to be enough descriptive information about the child or the suspected abductor that will be helpful to the public. And Amber Alerts are disseminated through multiple channels to reach the public as quickly as possible. This can include the EAS, the Emergency Alert System, the EAS, which interrupts radio and television broadcasts, literally saying we're interrupting this for a breaking thing and here's the Amber Alert details. Or they can use the WEA, the WEA, Wireless Emergency Alerts, which is basically pushes notifications to cell phones, mobile phones within a designated search area. Then there's digital road signs, so the police can display Amber Alerts information on like the motorway or highway signs electronically, and of course social media. Law enforcement will go on social media platforms in a local area to tell people. But as I said, Amber Alerts are used very rarely. So in the United States, for example, in 2021, there were 254 Amber Alerts used, compared with over 337,000 missing children reports, according to the FBI. So that translates to around less than 1 Amber Alert for every missing child. So that begs the question, why are Amber Alerts not used more often? Why are they not used for every missing child case? Well, the reasons are that many missing children are simply runaway cases, especially teens that have run away from home, and while their situation can be concerning, you can't really be using your resources for these cases. Then, as I've mentioned a few times, parental abduction. So in some cases, a parent might abduct their child, so Amber Alerts are not usually used in that situation because it's kind of assumed that the child is not in imminent risk of serious danger or death. Obviously, there are exceptions, but that's generally what happens. And also simply because the police might work on following leads in different ways. So they can have the leads for witnesses, surveillance footage, phone records. They might even trace the victim's child's online activities. For example, if they suspect they're running away, they might question individuals, analyze data footprints. So what I'm saying is there's lots of different police investigation techniques, and Amber Alerts are only used in a very small, specific subsection of those. And also public appeal. So you can have a public appeal that's like a press conference. That is not an Amber Alert. Okay, moving on. I'm going to tell you about the case of Patty Hearst. probably one of the most bizarre kidnapping cases of all times. Now, my die-hard fans might notice that I'm kind of recycling material from a previous video. Firstly, hi mum, and secondly, recycling is only good for the planet, so there's nothing wrong with that. So what happened with Patty Hearst? Before I say that, I'm going to introduce you to my channel. This is a Schmike for Small Minds. I make a smorgasbord of videos related to mental illness and offending and the crossover betwixt the two. I'm doing these debunked videos recently, so I've got some about restraining orders, female prisons, murderers, police investigations, blah, 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 blah. You think about it and it's related to true crime, then I have either made a video on it or I'm going to. I implore you to subscribe. Not only does it help me out immeasurably, but it guarantees that your hamster nibbles will never escape again. Okay, moving on, Patty Hearst. So in 1974, 19-year-old Patty Hearst, the granddaughter of the media magnate William Randolph Hearst, was kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army, the SLA, who are a radical left-wing guerrilla group, not to be mistaken from the SLA School Library Association, which is based in the UK, which believes that every pupil is entitled to effective school library provision. They've got a much less aggressive agenda. They almost never abduct children. The worst that this SLA are going to do is give them a paper cut. But the bad SLA, they used Hearst as a pawn for their revolutionary agenda. They demanded food and money for the poor in exchange for her release, but their main goal was to get attention, get notoriety. That's why they chose somebody that was the granddaughter of somebody that was so high profile. Okay, so far so good, that's the background. Why is this case interesting? Because whilst in captivity, Hearst underwent a dramatic transformation. She became indoctrinated into the SLA, and I kid you not, she even participated voluntarily in a bank robbery whilst she was kidnapped by them. Basically just like Johnny Utah from the film Point Break. Pappas, Angelo Pappas, punk, quarterback punk. But the aftermath was that Hearst was eventually captured and she even served time in prison. And her kidnapping remains very bizarre and a source of fascination and debate. Obviously what I'm talking about is Stockholm Syndrome, which actually comes from another case that happened earlier, not that much earlier actually, only the year before, August 1973, when a botched bank robbery happened in Stockholm. Stockholm, of course, is the capital of Sweden, a country of people just like you, but they're taller, they're much more beautiful, they're much more blonde, and they're better at assembling furniture. So in that case, 4 bank employees were held hostage in the bank's vault for 6 days, but bizarrely a bond developed between the captors and the captives. And one of the hostages even begged the Swedish Prime Minister, who has a very Swedish Prime Minister sounding name, Olof Palme, to go easy on her captors, even after she was out of danger. And some of the hostages even refused to testify in court. So I know what you're thinking, what is the psychology behind Stockholm Syndrome? Can you explain it to me in a very easily digestible form, Dr. Das? And the answer is yes, I can. Because I'm making these videos to try and educate you. That's why I'm doing this. And also to take over the world. Not going great. So the first thing I'd say is that Stockholm Syndrome is not actually a syndrome. It's not a formally recognized mental disorder, but it's actually a coping mechanism that some hostages develop to survive a terrifying situation, even though it's called a syndrome. Just like Dr. Dre is not a real doctor, and neither is Dr. Grande. Oh no, he didn't. So here's the breakdown of the key psychological aspects. So it's all about power imbalance. So in Stockholm Syndrome, the captor holds all the power. They're controlling the hostage's basic needs and their environment, which creates this like dynamic where the hostage feels like dependent and they feel helpless. And because they're on top of all of this, they've been cut off from their loved ones, they're living in constant fear, it's obviously incredibly stressful. So as a survival strategy, the hostage might unconsciously, and I really highlight that word, unconsciously, they develop a bond with the captor. And they do this as a way of appeasing the captor and increasing their chance of survival. So when the captor shows them any small kindness or leniency, it can be magnified in the hostage's mind as a sign of goodwill. So what happens? It forms an emotional dependence. So the hostage might start to rely on the captor for their emotional well-being, and they might develop a sense of loyalty or even gratitude. And the hostage might even, in extreme cases like Patty Hearst's, begin to justify the captor's actions or see them as like their own protector in a warped reality. Okay, I think I did a pretty good job of explaining that. You're welcome. Okay, moving on. The fifth and final myth about kidnappers is that kidnapped victims are helpless. Now, of course, I'm not saying that fighting back is necessarily a good course of action. It might be very dangerous. The safest approach might be to wait until you've got an opportunity to escape, etc., etc. Sometimes compliance might be the best option, but you can, and others have, left clues. So I'm going to tell you briefly about the case of Robert Joseph Long, Bobby Long. So he's an American serial killer and a prolific R-word who was executed in the state of Florida for the murder of Michelle Denise Sims. In the 3rd of November 1984, Long abducted 17-year-old Lisa McVeigh as she was riding her bike home from work. She was blindfolded, she was taken to Long's home, she was repeatedly R-worded. So even though she was in danger, she left many fingerprints on purpose in Long's house. She touched as many things as she could when he wasn't looking so that she could aid future police investigations. So after 26 long hours, Long released McVeigh. And because she was a very clever girl, her cunning and bravery helped the police to catch her captor. So she provided investigators with information on his home that she'd managed to kind of figure out, even though she was blindfolded. She could tell them details about the car and also the specific time period where she heard him use an ATM machine, so the police could kind of piece that all together by looking at the CCTV footage. And the police identified Long and he was arrested in November 16th, 1984. He was linked to the other murders through this red carpet fibres found on the body of several victims. So basically what I'm saying is it might be a horrific experience of being kidnapped, but if you stay calm and collective, you could pick up clues that could help get the perpetrator. Okay, we're about to finish. You can do it, get you back into it. We're on the home stretch now. Let's summarize what we've learned today, kids. There's lots of good reasons to kidnap a relative. Amber alerts are actually very rarely used, only for a tiny fraction of missing child reports. If you do ever get kidnapped, try not to rob any banks with your perpetrators. It's not a good look. David Mitchell probably hasn't kidnapped his own children and forced them into marriage. Kidnappers often stay in the local area and try and stay under the radar. Right, before I finish, I just want to make a point, which is this. Remember, kids, do not go off with strangers. If a weird man in the back of a van is giving you sweets, do not get off with them, right? Even if they're good sweets, even if it's those packets of Nerds, even if it's the Snickers, I know those crunchy peanuts deliver a satisfying protein crunch. I appreciate that gooey, rich caramel layer is like this delightful surprise for your taste buds, but the answer is definitely still no, and especially not for a curly whirly. Okay, I've rambled on enough. Buy my goddamn book. Watch the rest of my content, share my videos. Peace out, have a nice day, and do not forget, I love you.